Hello everyone, this is Albertina here again from Cornerstone Laser. I'm here with the fifth installment today, and what I'm going to show you is how to get your settings right, or lock in the settings for various materials. Now, up to this point you probably would have built your enclosure, set the height, and done your first engraving. So the next step obviously is to try and get your engraving settings right. What I'm going to do in this video is show you two options of doing that. One is my preferred option, which is the second option. The first one I'm just going to show you briefly, but it's not really something that I use. But I just want to show you that for completeness. So what you can see on the screen now is basically the end result. Effectively, what you want to end up with is effectively a table with an X and a Y axis showing you various settings, and then you can select what is actually preferential for you. So let's get going. All right, so the first thing is, well, the first option I'm going to go for, again, this is not my preferred option, so if you're not worried about using the Lightburn version of this, then probably best to skip to later in the video where I use a different version to get this, but I just wanted to show you that for completeness. So if you open up Lightburn and you go to Laser Tools and you go to Material Test, effectively this gives you a lot of parameters on setting something like this up. Now, if you're a beginner, it might be very difficult for you to do that because you don't actually know where the start and end of your settings are. But if you are a little bit more advanced, you might be able to do this. Like I said, the second option that I'm going to show you already has done this. So, if you're a beginner and this is confusing you, just skip to later in the video. But effectively, what this allows you to do is set 4 different settings on your vertical axis, which is typically your Y, and your horizontal, which is typically your Z. So this allows you to set speed, power, interval, and passes. So most often you would use a combination of speed and power because that's typically what gives you your settings. And so the first one I'm going to say on my vertical is speed. My second one is power. Now this just tells you that I'm going to have 10 rows and 10 columns. So that's going to be 10 iterations of this. If you want to make that more or less, you can go to less. I don't think 10 is really necessary. You can probably do this with 8. Now on your speed, you can say the minimum and maximum. Now bearing in mind that the Lightburn, the way that mine is set up, is that speed is actually very important. So you get typically measured in millimeters per minute or millimeters per second. And it's very important that you have that distinction because if you can literally be a factor of 60 out. So mine is set up in millimeters per minute. So 600 millimeters per minute is relatively slow. 18,000 millimeters per minute is really fast. So definitely you want to turn that down a little bit. So if you're looking at your speed, I would probably go, if you're looking at millimeters per minute, a maximum of 8,000, say for my machine. Yours might go a little bit more. Then this is just the height of the blocks. So you'll see effectively when you preview it, this is what it's going to show you. So I've got typically 8 columns and 8 rows now. And effectively what it does is it takes your minimum and maximum. So you see on my speed, which I've now changed, my minimum is 600. So that's where it starts. And it ends at 8,000. So wherever you set these parameters, it will just split that into 8 different versions. And you can see all the numbers are not nice, clean numbers. They're all effectively divided by whatever your count is over there. And the same thing you can do for power. So what's nice about power is that this is in percentages. So you can start off at 10% power, 0% power is obviously pointless, but 10% power and maximum 100% power. You shouldn't have to play with that too much. And what the benefit of using percentages is it doesn't matter if you've got a 5-watt diode or a 100-watt CO2 machine. Between 0 and 100% is pretty consistent between them. What I would, however, advise you to do is just, on the really slow speed and high power, you might literally set your workpiece alight. So just be aware of that when you set this up. All right, so effectively don't let this confuse you too much. So if you go to preview, you can see how it's actually going to look. So you can see it starts at 10% power, 100%. So effectively what it's going to do is it's going to engrave each of these blocks in a full type engraving. So that means at 600 millimeters per minute and 10% power, it will do this block. And then at this one at 23% power and 600 millimeters per minute, it will do that block until it's basically done everything. We'll also do it in one pass, which is what you want. You want to see what your laser can do in one pass. And the interval, which is effectively the spacing between the lines. So how it does a fill is it does typically it will do a line in the X direction, and then it will move Y axis up by the interval. So it will move these small iterations up so that it fills it up. and your interval is set at whatever your machine typically would be set at. In this case, it's 0.1 millimeter, so a tenth of a millimeter, and that's your interval. If you put your interval lower, it will overlap these lines a lot more, and it will give you a darker engraving. If you make your interval too big, then you're going to start getting gaps between your lines, and so that's what interval is about. So again, like if you're a beginner, don't break your head about this. You know, there's another option which I'll show you a little bit later. I'm not actually going to engrave this. So I don't think there's any real value in it. But if you wanted to play with this, then that's what you could do. If you wanted to do this on various materials, then you could do that as well. You can see it also gives you a little bit of information over here in terms of the amount of passes and interval, and then speed and power is what you want. So you can, if you wanted to use this, I would typically go to my user specification from the manufacturer of your laser and see what the minimum and maximum speeds are, and then you would get it from that. But again, make sure that you've got the units correct, that you're not thinking it's in millimeters per second, but it's actually in millimeters per minute, because you could damage your machine if it's running way too fast. All right, so the other parameters, like I said, you won't really use. This is if you want to set your interval. So again, your interval is the space between the lines, or the iterations that it moves. Typically, this would be very, very small. Like 2 millimeters is way too much. You can think of having a 2 millimeter gap between your layers would be way too much. So I would almost start that at 0.05, for instance, and go to a maximum of 1 millimeter. And then again, that would just be your different parameters. And then when you look at your preview, it will stage the intervals, or the intervals of the space in between the lines in this axis here, and power on that axis. I don't think there's really much value in that, because if you know what the width of your laser beam is, which is typically supplied by your manufacturer anyway, you could just put that in once off and you wouldn't have to test that. The other one is the number of passes. Now the number of passes, again, if you wanted to test how many passes it takes to cut something out, then you would use that. Whereas you could fairly easily test that just by doing that separately. So I wouldn't really use that to cut it. If you wanted to edit your material settings, so again, you can see here you can also set your number of passes. You can set your kerf, which is effectively how much of the material your laser beam removes when it cuts. And then if you wanted to put some text in there, then you would use this. So not very user-friendly for beginners, I'm afraid, but it is possible. All right, so getting on to the next one then. So what I've actually found on the internet, and it wasn't me that developed this, it was this gentleman on Make or Break Shops. He's got a great YouTube channel. I've used it a lot. He does a lot of great reviews on different types of lasers. He reviews CO2 lasers versus diode lasers, various types of diode lasers, various types of CO2s. And he actually has a page where he allows you to download a laser test that's already been set up, and the default settings have worked great for me. I'm sure they'll work great for you. You do have to jump through a couple of hoops when you download them. You can literally just Google Make or Break Shop laser test file. I'll probably put a link in the description below if you wanted to get to that quickly. But I've really found a lot of value in this. So effectively, when you go through the download, you would open it in Lightburn, select your test file, and this is what you get, and it's already basically set up. So if you go to your layers, what it effectively does, and what takes long, is that you have a whole bunch of layers, because you can think every one of these blocks is different settings. So here it's got your power rating, so from 10% to 100%, similar to what Lightburn generated already, and your speed in millimeters per minute. So it starts at 1,000 and then goes up to all the way up to 9,000. And then it says your line interval is 0.1 millimeters, etc. So very similar to what Lightburn does. What this one has in addition, it's got this one, which is typically, this will be your full setting. So these are all fulls. If you look at whatever this layer is over there, which is this one, you can see it's a full. So this is going to show you how it will look when your laser engraves these blocks, which is really good if you're doing a lot of engravings, especially if you're engraving on wood or acrylic or something like that. This will give you a good representation of how it will look at the end. This one is typically if you wanted to see how many, what settings you would need to cut through something. So you can see there's 100% laser power at like 100 millimeters per minute. So you can see the speed settings are way lower than they are here. And I don't typically use this because I know that my diode laser can't cut through a lot of, a lot of the materials are just too thick, so I can't cut through it. And so most of the time what I do is I basically just select this. Oops, not like that. I select it like that, and then I just delete it. I'm not going to do that now, but I'd delete it because I know that my laser will not cut through some of the material, and there's no sense in wasting the time and effort to actually engrave that. The second thing that this does, I'm just going to move this little rectangle back that I messed up, is that it also gives you the line intervals. So again, that will already do that line interval engraving that Lightburn did in a, you'd have to set up a separate test file. This one does it already. So it's good. Like I said, I don't really get much value out of this because normally you would just get that line interval settings, which is effectively the width of your laser beam, and import that into your settings when you set up your machine on Lightburn anyway. So I don't really get much value in that. What you would then again do is just, if you double click on the text, so the benefit of this is that you could take a whole range of materials, especially if you're going to work in different thicknesses of plywood, different thicknesses of acrylic, maybe leather. You would want to change this in terms of whatever material it is. So in this case, I've done it for 5mm birch plywood. You would change that to whatever you want it to do, and you can actually edit this in the text editor, so you can literally take out things and add them in, and that will just make it really bespoke for you. Another thing you could do, it might be a little bit counterintuitive, but when that's done and you know what settings it takes for you to cut something out, you could literally draw a rectangle around this whole thing, give it another layer, whatever layer you can make it, whatever that is, and then make it the same settings for you to cut it out. And you could keep these then for later for reference if you're doing a wide range of materials fairly often. So that's really helpful. I found that to be amazingly helpful for me. It's a really good way to get laser settings fairly quickly, because this does not take long to run at all. If I go to the preview, this will run in 20 minutes and 20 seconds. So, and if you've got a range of materials, this gives you a really nice way of actually sorting that out. So yeah, that's been very helpful for me. I hope it's helpful for you. I just want to show you the results now. Alright, so this is a photograph I've taken of the one that I did for my 5mm plywood. So I've got an Egimaster 2S, and that's about a 7.5 watt equivalent output laser. So you can see obviously at low power and high speed, you don't really see anything on this particular laser. Obviously, if you've got a higher speed, you're really going to have to put a lot of power in until you get to the end of the spectrum there. The worst case is if you've got a really low speed and a high power, you can see it actually engraves a lot deeper. What you can see over here as well is the smoke actually chars the material. So it actually gets so hot and there's so much ash. This is without air assist, by the way, that it actually chars your material. That's a look that you don't want. Now, I know from previous experience, I've been working with this laser for a couple of years before I've actually even used this particular laser test file, which actually would have come in very handy at the time. But I did it the old school method. I was, doing various tests. It was trial and error. I'd go higher speed, lower power. Most often, you don't really want to run your laser at 100% because that just reduces the life of the laser. I think the sweet spot somewhere between 60 and 80% typically, and that would give you higher speeds. And so I was most often than not running my laser for this material at around 2,100 millimeters per minute and around 55 to 60% power, and that gave me a really nice consistent engraving. You can see that that's right in the sweet spot over here, which gives me a really nice consistent engraving. So you can see that worked, but this would have been way quicker. Obviously, I would have removed the bits to cut because I know that my laser can't cut through this material anyway, so I didn't want to waste the time. And here you can see actually the line intervals. So you can see at a smaller line intervals, it gives you a nice consistent engraving. And as the line interval increases, you can see there's gaps in your material. That's the same with the vertical and horizontal, but that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think this adds much value if your machine has been set up correctly, but it will help you to understand, if you want to tweak this further, what that should be. All right, so that really brings to the end today's tutorial. I hope you found value in it. It's fairly simple if you use this method. I really recommend the second option as opposed to the first option, especially if you're a beginner. Basically just run it and job's done. So hopefully this added value to you, and if it did, I'd appreciate if you can like and subscribe and look at some of my other videos as well. Thank you. Cheers.